How's everybody doing? So I'm attempting to finish the head of the ramp and the barge slip here. So as most of you may or may not know, I'm well into the ferry build now. This is section 1, and the ferry is actually section 1B, I guess. I called it section 4 before, but I think it's more appropriate to section 1B because it is like a section that butts up against here. And for those of you that have been following the channel, you know that, well, these blocks weren't here. And the end of this is all 80 thou plastic that was welded on or glued and then welded around the bottom and the top, because this whole slab is encased in plastic. It's 3/8 Baltic birch. And then I just welded these blocks on because there was a piece of tape over here before I painted this. I just peeled the tape off of this beautiful slab of raw plastic, and I welded these evergreen plastic blocks that I made right onto it. And I thought I would add screws or pins, but you don't have to. Once you weld plastic, if the integrity is good, it's not coming off. So anyway, so the front, I don't have a lot of data on the front of this barge slip. I tried to get down on the beach here a little while ago, a few weeks. I did another visit, and it's just so much blackberry growing up here. They had cut it back, but it got shredded, getting halfway down there, and I bailed and backed out. I wanted to get down on the beach down here and look at this more, but I couldn't, so I just have to go with this. And excuse me, it's pretty accurate anyway, so I'm just going to wet it down with some water. You can see that I used these 3 colors last night, just wet on wet. For those of you that don't know, wet on wet is where you use acrylics or watercolors. You have to wet the surface, and then you put wet paint on them, and you just work. You focus on the solvent, in this case, which is the water, with a bit of flow agent, and a little bit of liquid dish soap or whatever. Forget about the colors, get the general colors, but focus on controlling the water. If you learn to control the water, the solvent with this methodology, you'll master it eventually, and colors just secondary. Okay, so you can see that what I did is I basically used these 3 colors. I used black along the bottom because old rust, especially around naval subjects, it just goes almost black. And then mid rust is like burnt umber, and then you get a bit of orange rust, like fresh. I have some that run down from these rail pockets. But I was just playing around because this is a series of layers I did last night, but it's sort of the primary layer. Now I'm going to do a little bit of white because they painted the front of this barge ramp, or when they maintain it, right, they use white, they paint it white. I've seen different colors. This is aged white, or just white, which is the same, very close to aged white. It's not the stock white. There's 3 whites by Model Air. So I don't like to use the pure white version. I like to use the aged white, which is actually this one right here. So there's not a whole lot of difference. There's some difference, but it's a little more, has a little more cream kind of beige tone to it. So I just wet that down, and like I say, the trick is, I like to stress that if you don't wet it down, the method won't work. So, and if you have too much water, you just wick some away. If you don't have enough, you add more. But once you realize how to use, or just through practice, just the right wetness. This is it's not new. It's just an old watercolor methodology. So I can cover up anything I want here, but what I want to do is I want some contrast. So I'm going to only stab in a bit of white where the black is, because I want the contrast. I just want to see what it does first. There might be too much water there, but that's okay, because you'll see how it just did that little bit of fade there. If you take your time and then decide, well, I'm not going to do this in one go, then you'll realize that, wow, this is cool, because that's how it happens in Mother Nature, right? Weathering doesn't happen overnight. It happens over days, months, weeks, years. So once you get into it, you start to stab in little spots of paint and just watch what it does and play around with it. I like to use a small brush like this and small amounts. So the idea is this, that somebody paints this every year or two, and it doesn't take long when the barge or the ferry butts up against it for the paint to flake off and erode away. So I try to avoid these hard edges, try to soften them with a bit of water, just work one area at a time. So it doesn't take much, right? But the key is less is better in this case. And if it's too contrasty or too stark, I like to come in later with my airbrush. I'll probably put a super thin wash of linoleum deck brown on this. Like this area here would look good with the darker, with the white paint. So anyway, so I want to get this done because I'm well into the barge or ferry build, and I'm going to get it done. I'm going to follow it through. I'm not doing any, I mean, I'll do some of this in between. This is a bit of an update that way, but I'll be poking away at the layout. But I'm full on, like my bench is occupied by the ferry, and it's going to stay occupied until it's finished. I figured I'd get it done in 2 to 3 months. But it'll probably come out sooner if all goes well. So I want to get all this done, but you know, it's never ending. I got the kiosk to do, and then there's details and winches on the front of this ramp as well. So I want to get all this kind of done. Before I start, you know, messing around with the ferry, like in terms of painting the ferry and sliding it on and off the layout. And another reason why the white here, just in closing, I'll just explain to you what works good with this white paint is the fact that underneath these plastic blocks is white plastic, right? So when the ferry couples and uncouples back and forth, what's going to happen is it's going to wear some of the paint off. And guess what's going to show? White. So I won't have to touch it up with paint all the time. So this method takes a little bit. You got to kind of get into the zone. There's different ways of doing this. You can use some of the military modeler techniques and peeling paint with hairspray, etc. But sometimes I like to just, you know, relax and do things by hand and layers. I don't want this to be too fresh. I want it to look like it's in fairly steady use. Throw a bit of water on here now. So that's what I'm going to do. Get this ready. Do a bit of work on the barge slip. You know, like I say, there's lights to go on the barge slip. You can see I've moved all the components to the side, which is a good thing, right? Because how many times have I cleared this deck, you know, over the last couple of years with this build? But anyway, this is the method I like to use. One of the methods I like to use because I find it really relaxing. And, you know, there's no toxic smell, no odor. It's very easy to do if you just do thin layers. And just stop. If you aren't feeling it, stop or come back. But sometimes before you start to feel it, you got to plug in. You got to make a decision. Make a decision, and the good feeling comes back again, okay?